trying to find a title for the story. But as far as the cover is concerned, the only things they really ask me is, do you have a particular scene from the book that you would like shown on the cover? Which I didn't even have that. Like, my editor had 3 different scenes, and I was like, yeah, any of those sound really great to me. I'm pretty flexible. But I did say that because it's kind of a hard story, I wanted it to have colors that were kind of hopeful and didn't, it just showed the hope of middle grade and the hope of her summer. So I was a little more particular about that, but all of the rest of the stuff, the first time they sent me a sketch, it's by a woman named Svetla Radioeva, and she used to work for Disney. So when I saw the cover, I was like, it's very clear to me that she used to work for Disney. Like, it was perfect for me. There's a little, you can't really see it from where you're sitting probably, but her foot, the little toe kind of goes up a little bit, and that's like a very, I don't know, it just felt like it gave so much character to the whole thing. And then around, I was very pleased with it, but around the backside, it kind of shows all of her camping stuff. She starts her period while she's there, so you'll see a little, like, womanhood supply is what she calls them. You'll see a little supply package here, and I just loved all the little details that they had, and I'm not an artist, so I never would have come up with any of that stuff. So, I was very pleased with what the publisher came up with for this story.
We're writing buddies, and so when she showed me a picture of what it was going to look like, I think I squealed. And I was like, this is the cutest thing I've ever seen. Yeah. And if it were my cover, I would like blow it up on a poster and hang it up on the wall, because it's just so cute. I love the colors, and I tried to paint my nails to match.
That's awesome.
So Victoria shares her story with us through her journals, which she's careful not to call diaries, because she doesn't want her siblings to read them, because they think, ooh, a diary.
They're so
but
juicy.
If it's journal, what does she call it, her opus to?
Opus to growing up.
Yeah. So what has journaling meant to you personally, and how did you decide to write this book in a journal format?
So journaling is very important to me. Even now, I bookend my days. I start my day with journaling, and I end my day with journaling. And even, growing up, I always kept a journal. I used to, and she actually says this in the book, and it's like directly from my life. I used to start out every entry saying, like, dear diary, and then at some point I took a turn where I just thought, I'm going to be writing to future me, and what does future me need to know about today, or what does she need to remember, what does she need to forget, so I kept pretty detailed journals all growing up, and actually some of them I consulted for this book just to remember the state of mind that you get in when you're a 12-year-old. And so I think journaling, what it does for people, and this has been backed by research too, is that it helps you. I have anxiety, and Victoria has anxiety in the book, and it helps deal with some of those things. It helps you deal with depression. It helps you form coherent memories. It helps you through difficult times in your life. So it's just always played a really big part in my life. So when I started writing this book, it first started out as prose, like it was just a straight up book, and that didn't feel right. So I took it into a novel in verse, which is just a book compiled of poems. Like my first book, yeah, and that didn't feel right. So I took it back to prose, and then I took it back to poetry, and I was like, I just cannot find the right format for this book. And then I thought, you know what, this is it's a story about this girl who is so much like me. Why don't I try journal entries? So that's when I kind of zeroed in on the journal entries, and it just felt very natural, and she can be very, I was very honest in my journals, and even when I felt something mean about someone, that was a place where I could record that I really don't like this person, and nobody, that was not something I had to share with anybody, and I feel like that's just such a safe place for kids to go. When you have uncharitable thoughts and stuff like that, you can put them down in a journal, and nobody ever has to know, So that's what I wanted to do for this story, just have that internal link to Victoria and all of the uncharitable thoughts. She has a lot of uncharitable thoughts.
Rightfully so.
Yeah.
She goes through a lot.
So,
I love that. When I was young, I pretty much only wrote in my diary when I was mad about
oh,
something.
yeah, right?
So I had read back through them as an adult, and I'm like, man, I was mad at my
All
mom
the
a lot.
time.
That's all I wrote about.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
But it helps, like, that's
Yeah.
where you get your feelings out, and then you can be yourself to the rest of the world, you know? So.
I love that. Well, and you mentioned anxiety, and she does struggle with that, as I think a lot of people do. And I did want to read this little spot because she spirals so quickly, and that is kind of how my anxiety happens. Is in within 2 seconds I can go from something's just not right to everyone's dead, and like it happens fast.
Very
so
fast.
this little part I remember marking it in my copy. She says, "My throat thickened, the spiral expanded. Maybe she had a blowout like that one time." She's talking about her mom, why she hasn't called. "Maybe she had a blowout like that one time, but unlike that one time, she flipped the car. Maybe she had a blowout like that one time, but unlike that one time, she flipped the car and crashed through the windshield, and now she's lying on the side of the road dying." And I'm like, I'm so trapped with that, because that's exactly what my brain does.
Yeah.
And so my anxiety would kind of manifest through throwing up. I threw up a lot as a kid. Eventually my mom homeschooled me because I was throwing up every day, and it was just a problem just going to school. And I noticed that Victoria would struggle with her breathing. She would always comment about what it felt like to breathe and how difficult it was, and that she mentioned a few times that her arm would go numb. And I noticed on social media you made a wonderful video about anxiety. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about dealing with anxiety personally,
Yeah.
and share what, besides journaling, what other mindful things we could do if we struggle with it.
So I would also say that anxiety, it looks different for everybody, you know, and mine kind of manifests in that spiral where I go straight to worst case scenario. My arm goes numb, I feel like I'm having a heart attack, I can't breathe, and it's been like that since I was young. And when I was younger, I didn't really have a lot of tools to use, so that's why I made that video, because I wish that someone had told me, like, here's some things you can try to help you get through these panic attacks and this anxiety. And so a lot of what I do today is I do a lot of long distance running, which helps it just helps my brain decompress, and I also learn how to breathe as you have a rhythm of breathing, so that when I have those moments of panic and when I feel like I'm short of breath, I'm like, I've already been here, because I had to go up a hill, and the breathing got tight, and I know how to breathe through this. I do a lot of meditation and yoga, which has really helped, like, connect the mind and the body. So that helps a lot for me. And then just in the moment, trying to stay in the moment, because a lot of my anxiety manifests in future thinking. So, trying to prepare for everything and trying to figure out, like, how can I get out of this future scenario that may happen. So bringing myself back into the present, like, what can I see, what can I smell, what can I hear, what do I hear around me, what do I feel around me, how am I feeling with my, feet on the floor. So just really paying attention to a lot of that kind of stuff. It has been helpful for me to manage those anxious times. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of diligent work, but yeah.
It is, because anxiety is something that you can't really help, but just
Yeah,
kind of sneaks up on you.
yeah, it does,
So
yeah.
I can see that it is.
And I'm not gonna say I do it perfectly either. Like, I get surprised by anxiety every now and then.
And what
And
affects
it's-
you and what doesn't.
Yeah,
sometimes,
exactly. It's funny too. I am married to a person who has never struggled with anxiety, and so when something goes wrong, his immediate thought is, like, everything will be okay. And sometimes I'm just like, what would that be like? I have no idea.
Sounds real nice.
Well, it does, right? I have no idea what that would be like, because my immediate thought is everything is falling apart.
We're all doomed.
We're gonna end up, it's doomsday.
Yeah.
So
I do that a lot. So does my mom. Anytime there's a storm coming, she'll call and be like, just making sure you check the radar, you know what's coming. We're very weather phobic.
Yeah,
We've had some
Well, I
close
mean, y'all
calls
live
with
here,
things.
so.
So writing, she loves writing, obviously the journal, but she knows she has a story to tell, and I love that. And she says on page 37, Virginia Woolf complains quite a bit about having the words, but not having the will. And that stuck out to me so much. I was like, this is my publishing mood currently. I have lots of story ideas, I just don't have the will to write. So even though Victoria often refers to herself as a coward, she is so strong, I think, when it comes to her drive to write. She's determined to will herself to write, and she says, even if I say absolutely nothing. Do you ever feel blocked when you're writing, but will yourself to get something down anyway? What's your process when things are hard?
So I feel like I have a very different process than some people might. I kind of treat it like training, like an athlete training or something. So like there are days that I wake up and I have, a 12-mile run on the calendar, and I'm just like, I don't want to do this run because it's super humid, but I do it anyway. And that's kind of how I treat the writing too, because you're not always excited about it. And there are things that happen, especially in the publishing world, things will happen and you're not as excited because you've just gotten a rejection or something like that. And I always try to remember this is like, so in running I try to remember today's legs are not yesterday's legs. So the way that I feel today is not going to be the way I feel tomorrow, but I just need to put in the practice and keep doing it. And that's how I approach the writing life. I've taken a lot of lessons from long distance running for writing because I feel like the practice of it and the dedication of it and the commitment, and just sometimes what I write is crap. And I'll just, in the revision process, it all gets scrapped. But it's also just the practice. Like I do will myself to write, even if I don't feel like it, I make sure that I get those words in. And sometimes they're not great words, but I always know that even if they're not great today, tomorrow they could be much better, And sometimes too with perspective, like you look back at it and you're like, well, it wasn't really that bad. So if you never put the words on the page, right, you don't get to do that. And so that's kind of how my mindset works, is like, at least I have words and I can rearrange them. Virginia Woolf also says, arrange whatever pieces may come, and I kind of see that with words too. It's like, these words have come, now I can arrange them however I want to, or just delete them all if I want to.
That's a powerful button. I love that, and I love that you said practice, because that's something I think I forget a lot with writing, is that it doesn't have to be great.
Yeah.
It's just practicing.
Yeah.
The stuff I write now might be better than my first book.
I hope that the stuff I write now is way better than what I did.
Right?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So let's move on to talking about bullies. So we've all read stories where there's bullies, right? But I don't think I've read many books where the bully was one of the parents. And that was a big thing in this book. It's heartbreaking, but I think it's a reality that a lot of kids are dealt with. So Victoria starts her summer determined that her father sees her as a mature young woman, yet he seems determined to constantly, ignore that fact and, bring her down. And I loved, so on page 151, she says, Victoria Reeves never stops trying. And I was so struck by that. I was amazed at her brave face and how many times she pinned on her smile, even though she deserved to be miserable.
Yeah.
But she's like, he's only going to see me as this way. I'm a pleasant. But how difficult was that to write? Because can you tell us a bit about what it's like as a writer to keep throwing rocks at your character?
Yeah, it was tough, because I think Victoria is probably a character who is most like me out of any of the stories that I've written. And so just, piling those things on her. But I also went through a lot as a kid. And so I know what some of those situations are like. And I knew that in order, you don't feel strong going through those situations, but you come through them on the other side and you're like, wow, I was way stronger than I thought I was. And I think that was important for me to get across, because one of the biggest things I love in middle grade stories is when kids own their own power. Like, they have so many people in their lives telling them what to do and telling them who to be. I'm gonna get emotional here. But they get, in the end, they get to decide that. And so I think that's kind of what I wanted to do with this character, is just like, she has so many things coming at her and so many opportunities to be who someone wants her to be that is not who she really is, that I wanted her to finally stand up and just say, that's not who I am and that's not who I want to be. Because it's really important for me when kids can say, I don't need to be this person for other people, I need to just be myself, and so while it was hard to like pile all of that stuff on her, it's also, I feel like it's just such an important message to get across to kids that, like, you're magnificent just the way you are, not because you run the fastest mile or because you write the best book or because, you make the best test grades or something. It's like, that's something I struggled with all through adolescence. And if I can let kids understand that they don't have to be anyone different than who they are, sooner than I learn that, then that's like totally worth it for me, So yeah, I'll take my character through anything.
I think that's beautiful. I mean, the whole, when I finished it, I was like, this is gonna be the book for some little girl out there, and hopefully many of them.
Yeah.
But I think that it's gonna help them through many things. There's so many different things you touch on here, including first periods. So I loved how she pondered on the word period. Like, throughout the book, she would talk about the different meanings of the word. And I thought that was really interesting. And how she referred to her menstrual period as the visitor. And camping is like probably the worst environment I can think of to get that, to deal with it in general. But the first time, no. Thankfully, I do not have a first period story that's super traumatic, but I remember my first year of learning to deal with it. We were on a rafting trip with my family, and the raft guide was like super cool, and I'm like, every bump we hit I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. And we will have one stop at this little island thing, and there's one porta can, and I'm like waiting in line for that, and I'm coming out with my trash, and it was miserable. But I think they're not discussed very much, even amongst friends. I don't know, and especially in books. I have not really seen it, maybe mentioned a couple times. But I think young readers will really bond with Victoria over this story.
Yeah. So the first period story is actually like exactly how it happened to me, because it was my first summer visiting my dad after 2 years of not seeing him, and as soon as we get to Ohio, which is where he's taking us, I start my first period. And my mom had sent me with supplies like Victoria in the story, but it was not enough, and I didn't know what to do. Like, it was very traumatic.
You were
just
camping, right?
Yeah, we were camping. Yeah. And it was like I had to figure out, can I like, limit what I use, or can I reuse them, or how does this even work? Like,
she had no one to ask.
No, right? Because there's your dad, and you haven't seen him, and it's just like, it was so traumatic. So when I started writing the story, I was like, I've got to put that in there, because it is such a traumatic story, and it's stuck with me like all of these years. So that was important for me to get in there. And also, I feel like if we talk more about those things, it just becomes a more natural thing. Like, there's still, for young girls, there's still some shame around a first period. Like, I still see girls when I go into schools, like, kind of slipping things into their pocket and being embarrassed. And it's just like, it's a natural, normal thing, And if I actually now, when I read middle grade, I'm like, every single middle grade book I write about a female character, like, there's going to be some mention of her having her period, because
reality.
It's reality. Like if it spans more than like a month, then she has to deal with it at some point. So like I want to get it in there so that it's just a natural, you know, my sons all know about the period and all of these things. And so in the story too, she calls it the visitor because that's how her mom talked to her about it. Like the visitor might come visit while you're visiting your dad. And so it was like this really, and that was actually the conversation that my mom had with me that was like creepy and, you know, like, you don't know anything.
That sounds very creepy. There's a visitor.
While you're visiting, and you're like, how long will she stay? Because I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So that was, I used all of that and tried to do it in a humorous way too, where like, you know, there's some humor in there about, you know, the way she was trying to ration supplies.
Oh, yeah. Well, and so much of it, I was bringing back so many memories. I was like, because I've tried to swim with a pad, and like that doesn't work. And like, like who can tell this? Is how, there was so much, and I was like, I'm so glad this is written down, because I think that so many girls who are going through it, or they're going to see themselves here, like, oh, it's normal to feel like this, and I love that. So Victoria's parents divorced a couple years back before this starts, and she hasn't seen him since, right? And I feel like that puts a lot of added pressure to this summer. Can you tell us a bit about her mindset going into what she calls her first magnificent summer with Dad? And how that changes throughout the story?
So this was very much the circumstances of when I, you know, saw my dad after 2 years of not having any contact with him after my parents divorced. So there was like a lot of pressure to impress him, and I used a lot of that in this book. But I think when there's divorce in the equation, and there's a parent who leaves completely, there's always this hole inside the kid where they think, if I could have been someone different, maybe he would have stayed, or maybe she would have stayed. And that's a reality for a lot of kids. And so I wanted to make sure that I had, you know, there's this parent who you miss when they're gone, but you're also a little bit relieved because they're not the nicest person in the world. But then you always want to like save that space. You always want to be this person who is worthy of having his attention, you know. And that's kind of her mindset is, if I can be this person, maybe he'll realize his mistake and come back home. And, you know, as the summer progresses, that gets to be a reality that just gets farther and farther away. But she does not go down without a fight, you know, she tries and tries and tries. And I think there's a moment where, you know, a kid recognizes or has to recognize that they can't keep putting themselves into this little box for this person who doesn't even appreciate it. You know, they have to stand up and be themselves. So that's, you know, that's kind of how her journey changed. And it's an important message for me to get to kids too, because, you know, that's something I dealt with. Like, I wore lenses for a long time, even into my adult years, of like, if I could just have been good enough to bring him, you know, this, if I could have done enough or been enough or, you know, been the person he wouldn't have complained about or whatever, then maybe he would have come back. And so like, those lenses they're a difficult reality, and to live with them for so many years, like it's taken me years of therapy to like try to peel off those layers, you know. And if I can save a kid from having to wear those lenses for their life and see everything through that, like, that's a huge deal to me. So
that's amazing, and I appreciate how difficult this was for you to write, but knowing that it's going to be needed for somebody.
Yeah,
so definitely. You put yourself through that for them, and I appreciate that. Yeah. That's really amazing. Can you tell us what's next?
Well, you will see Victoria again. There's going to be a second Magnificent Summer.
Oh yeah.
It will release next summer, and it's all about her mom has a boyfriend, and this is very much based on my story with my stepdad. As soon as he came onto the scene, I was not a nice person at all. I played pranks, I blamed things on him, like all I wanted was for him to go away. So the whole story is about Victoria's, like, she has a no-fail plan for getting rid of Kyle Moreland, who is her mom's boyfriend. And so it's really sweet, it's probably funnier than this one because of all the things she does. And it's dedicated to my stepdad, who has been my stepdad for 30 years now, who is a really great guy. So, yeah, so it's going to be a fun one.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited.
Yep.
I can't wait to get an early copy of that
I
one.
know.
Wink, wink. Does anyone have any questions for Rachel?
Yes.
Is that actually a real story?
A real story?
Mm-hmm.
I share a lot of similarities with her story. Maybe not all, but yeah, but it's based on my experience. So.
Is that you when you were little?
No, well, I think they kind of tried to make it look like it was me. So yeah, they were asking, you know, she's got the brown eyes and the brown hair. And
She's
so.
adorable.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Any other questions?
Had one more, something.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what, I've got one.
Okay.
So, like, how long did it take you to write this book?
This one, so I'm a pretty fast writer. I can usually write like a draft within 3 to 6 months, but this one took around 4 years.
Probably because it was more personal?
It was more personal. There's a lot of emotion involved in it and stuff. And it's probably the first one that I've used humor in. And humor is really hard to get right.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to make sure it wasn't like the standard humor where it's like, you know, fart jokes and some of the, you know, like some of that stuff. So I wanted it to be like mature humor. There are some like immature things in it, but I wanted it to be mature humor, like I was always like very sarcastic, very, you know, very humorous. I had those little quips that I would, you know, come back with. So I used a lot of what I remember as a kid. But I think because it was, you know, it was a hard story to write, that it just took a really long time. So from start to finish. And it was like 11 drafts. A lot of my stories I could do within like 5 or 6 maybe. But this one was like 11 or 12 drafts that it took. So, and that's like, you know, you think about this book, it's like 300 something pages and you're reading from start to finish like 12 times, you know, that's a lot of time. And I'm still not tired of the book, which I love that.
Perfect.
Because a lot of times, you know, you're going through those books and you're like, oh my gosh, I never want to see this again.
Well, I can say it was definitely worth it, and I know they all seem to feel it was definitely worth it. And what we get to do right now, besides have cookies and get bookmarks, is if you want Rachel to autograph your books, if you want to buy more books, so that she can also autograph those, this is the time. I would like you to kind of sneak around here and like where I'm standing, that's where you'll come to them. And Kristen's books are for sale too, so you can give her some signing to do as well. Have a cookie, and we'll collect your chairs once you're out of them. Let's give them a round of applause.